welcome to the studio. Look, if you're an aspiring producer trying to take your tracks to the absolute next level, you are exactly where you need to be. In this explainer, we're going to completely demystify the hit-making process. We'll be breaking down the exact techniques, mindsets, and layering secrets that chart-topping producers use to craft music that connects with millions. Think of this as your own personal masterclass. Let's get into it. Okay, let's start by directly addressing a frustration I know we have literally all felt. You spent hours in your DAW, stacking up sounds, EQing kick drums to death, but your mixes just still sound muddy. You hit a wall, or your track just doesn't hit hard enough, your session is loaded with plugins, but the song itself feels weirdly empty. So why does that happen? Well, before we can fix the mix, we actually have to fix the mindset. The legendary producer Brian Eno has long advocated for a major shift in how we approach this. He says, use unfamiliar instruments to discover fresh sonic territories. When you don't know the right way to play something, you're suddenly totally free to experiment without any preconceptions. Stepping out of your comfort zone, breaking your own rules, and picking up an instrument or tweaking a synth patch you have zero experience with, that is often the very first step to beating that dreaded blank screen. Which brings us to section 1, beating the blank screen. Let's look at some real ways to overcome producer's block. To overcome that initial paralysis of an empty project file, we need actionable time constraints. Because let's face it, perfectionism is the absolute enemy of progress. If you try the 30-minute track challenge, literally forcing yourself to complete an entire piece of music in half an hour, you completely bypass your inner critic. It's huge. Or try the Pomodoro technique, working intensely for 25 minutes and then taking a strict break. That forces immediate creativity. And hey, if that fails, change your physical environment to disrupt that stale thinking, or just focus purely on sound design rather than trying to write a melody. Just create cool textures first. Moving on to section 2, finding your signature sound. It's time to define your vibe. So once you're actually creating, the next big hurdle is cohesion. Think about it. A great movie relies on a unified score to tell its story, right? Your music project should be no different. How do we get there? By laying out your specific metaphorical ingredients on the counter. Try this little journaling exercise. Write down your favorite childhood music and compare it to your current inspirations right now. Find the common threads. If you limit your palette to just those ingredients, say a specific vintage synth, a certain style of distorted bass, and maybe a unique vocal chop, you can make a pop song, a hip-hop track, or a dance anthem, and they will all sound undeniably like you. All right, section 3, the 5 functional layers. Let's talk about building that foundation. Now that we know what we're cooking with, let's talk about how to actually build it. Think of building a track, kind of like building a giant cathedral. You absolutely must build a simple, solid foundation before you start adding complex spires and gargoyles all over the place. To do that, we look to the concept of functional texture. Academic researchers like Alan Moore and Megan Levingood actually broke down modern pop recordings to figure out exactly why they sound so massive without sounding cluttered. And what they discovered is that instruments are grouped by the specific structural and frequency roles they play. Think of this as the layer cake of music. There are 5 functional layers. First, the beat layer, which gives you that explicit pulse, your drums and percussion. Then the bass layer provides your harmonic foundation with sub and mid basses. After that, the harmonic layer fills out the texture, with pads and rhythm guitars. On top of that is the melodic layer, acting as the lead messenger, so your vocals or lead synth. And finally, the novelty layer, which provides this awesome column-response interplay, using odd synths or cool sound design. The big secret to a huge track? Ensuring each of these 5 layers occupies its own space, both in frequency and over time, without ever clashing. That brings us to section 4, pro layering tricks. Let's look at how to actually fatten up those layers in the studio. Look, we've all tried stacking 5 different synth basses only to end up with a completely muddy mess, right? Instead, try hybrid layering. If your low end feels lifeless, try blending a real, slightly distorted live guitar or bass with a synthetic sub-bass. The contrast of that warm, human, analog grit pushed right up against the deep, digital perfection of the sub, it adds incredible dimension and richness that you just can't get from stacking multiple soft synths alone. Next up, if your track is feeling stiff, you desperately need ghost percussion and motion layers. Try tucking subtle Foley sounds, maybe a quiet tom loop, or even just environmental noise underneath your static hi-hats or chords. Or add a light, plucky melodic arpeggio underneath your main pad. You don't want the listener to explicitly hear these elements. You want them to feel them. It gives the track a breathing, human pulse. And for that elusive novelty layer, try taking a clean signal, like a really basic synth sound, and blending it with a heavily distorted, heavily EQ'd copy of itself. Mixing these super contrasting tones creates massive, bizarre, out-of-this-world sounds. You can literally turn a simple sine wave into something that sounds like a roaring monster, and it perfectly fills that novelty space in your arrangement. Okay, section 5, deconstructing a hit. Let's see how this works in Miley Cyrus's track, Flowers. Let's apply all these concepts to a real-world case study, the masterfully produced, disco-funk-inspired hit, Flowers. If we break down its functional layers, we see incredible restraint here. It uses a minimalist arrangement to keep the focus entirely on Miley's raspy vocal, which is our melodic layer. The harmonic layer, that's a 70s flanged electric piano playing a simple disco-era progression. For the bass layer, they use that hybrid layering we talked about, a muted, funky live bass mixed seamlessly with a synth bass. And the beat layer features drums that are heavily gated using a sidechain trigger, making them incredibly tight. It is an absolute masterclass in highly specific, retro textural choices. But Flowers isn't just a sonic triumph, it's a brilliant narrative one too. The song directly references the lyrical and chord progression themes of Bruno Mars' When I Was Your Man. But where Bruno's saying of regret, I should have bought you flowers, Miley responds with empowerment. I can buy myself flowers. This thematic inversion subverts our expectations completely and adds a massive layer of cultural resonance to the track. Inside that brilliant arrangement sits a perfect example of the novelty layer. Listeners often notice this distinct, kind of nasal, oboe-like 70s-style synth. Music analysts call this a nanohook. It acts as a responder. Miley's vocal makes a call, and this synth steps in to fill the negative space she leaves behind. It creates a seamless, engaging conversation that keeps the listener hooked without ever stepping on the lead vocal. Section 6. Power of contrast. How to make that chorus really hit. So, how do you make a chorus hit harder without simply reaching for the volume dial and cranking it up? You use psychological amplification, what we call this slingshot effect. In a standard pop song, you expect a heavy kick drum right on the very first beat 1 of the chorus. But in Flowers, they do the exact opposite. They leave beat 1 entirely empty. There's a split second of intentional silence. It effectively pulls back the bowstring, creating a vacuum of explosive tension before the music actually drops. By unleashing the full, layered instrumentation on beat 2 instead of beat 1, the track totally subverts your expectations. It provides a sudden shift in energy that propels the rhythm forward with incredible, strutting confidence. It feels massive, not because it's louder, but because it emerged from a moment of silence. As we wrap up, I want to leave you with a really crucial reminder. We've talked a lot about functional layers, sidechain gating, frequency masking, all that good stuff. But despite all these technical tricks, the true soul of your music lies in its humanity. Retain those human imperfections. Leave a little bit of the organic timing in your playing. A flawlessly engineered, completely sterile track is never going to move a listener the way raw, unfiltered emotion will. So here's my challenge to you. Open up your latest project file. Look at those functional layers. Are they fighting each other, or are they working together to build your cathedral? Where can you add a little hybrid texture? And most importantly, which empty spaces in your DAW are just waiting to be turned into slingshots? Get back to the studio, trust your taste, and start building. Catch you next time.